Hi family, thanks for joining us for another episode of Kingdom Portions. We're going to be looking at the first few chapters of Deuteronomy, and we hope that the pairings and the conversation are a blessing to you. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. Also, if you enjoy what we're doing and it's benefiting you and edifying you, please consider the links in the descriptions where we have a Patreon monthly membership, or we just have a regular PayPal, or we even have a P.O. box for someone that just want to send old school support and donations. But that's what keeps us going and helps us create new and better content for you all the time. And so we just really thank you for prayerfully considering something like that. Please pass this video on. So if it's blessing you, if it's something that you feel is helping you understand the scriptures, share it. Social medias, click the like, drop a comment. That helps the YouTube algorithms share it to other people. So we love you guys. We thank you for all your kind words, your support, and I hope this episode is a great blessing to you. Oh, Shabbat Shalom. I'm Sean Griffin.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm Lindsay Griffin.
And this is Kingdom Portions on Kingdom in Context. So thank you for joining us. And tonight we're going to go over the Torah portions mixed with some unique verses of our choosing that complement it from the Psalms, the Prophets, the books of wisdom, also the Brit, as well as an extra biblical book. So thanks for joining us, and we're excited. I'm excited, sweetie. Are you excited?
I'm a little nervous.
This is her first time on camera, I believe. So she's anxious and nervous at the same time. So we're be gracious to her, and we are going to just jump right in because we love the Word. Both of us do. We love studying it. So any questions you have, put them in the comments, and either Lindsay or I will try to get to them as soon as possible.
One of us can definitely get to them.
Right.
It's usually me.
Yeah, I'm usually either working or filming, so I'm doing my best to answer some of the questions, but I definitely appreciate help when it comes to that. So, and we're going to begin in Deuteronomy, and then we'll jump, to some complementary verses from other parts of Scripture that line up with it. You want to start reading first?
Yeah, I can read first.
Okay.
These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel across the Jordan, in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Di-Zahab. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Now Moses spoke to Bnei Yisrael according to all Adonai had commanded him for them, in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, after he had struck down Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, king of the Bashan, who lived in the Ashtaroth in Edrei. Across the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses began to explain this Torah, saying, Adonai our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, You have stayed long enough at this mountain. Turn, journey on, and enter the hill country of the Amorites, and all their neighbors, in the Arabah, the hill country, the lowland, the Negev, and by the seashore, the land of the Canaanites, and the Lebanon, as far as the great river the Euphrates. See, I have set the land before you. Enter and possess the land that Adonai swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them and to their descendants after them. I spoke to you at that time, saying, I am not able to bear the burden of you by myself. Adonai your God has multiplied you, and here you are today like the stars of heaven in number. May Adonai, God of your fathers, increase you 1,000 times as many as you are, and may he bless you just as he has promised you. How can I bear your load and burden and bickering by myself? Choose for yourselves wise and discerning men, well known to your tribes, and I will appoint them as your heads. You answered me and said, The thing you have said to do is good. So I took the heads of your tribes, men who are wise and well known, and appointed them as heads over you, leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s, leaders of 10s, and officials for your tribes. I commanded your judges at that time, saying, Hear cases between your brothers, and judge fairly between a man and his brother, or the outsider with him. You must not show partiality in judgment. You must hear the small and the great alike. Fear no man, for the judgment is God's. The case that is too hard for you, you shall bring to me, and I will hear it. I commanded you at that time everything you should do.
All right, so I think this is paralleling the end of that, of course, when he's being instructed to appoint judges.
Mm-hmm.
Paralleling, what is that, Exodus 18? Jethro shows up, the father-in-law, tells him that you're going to burden yourself, and you're basically stress yourself out trying to make all these judgments between the people.
Right.
So choose men who are, faithful in upholding the truth,
that can pass on these instructions faithfully, and that way, and they can also hear disputes. So this is the point where I guess they start. This is, of course, Deuteronomy is retelling some of the things that's already happened. So this is the retelling of the moment at Sinai when Moses appointed leaders from among the tribes, which would be the equivalent, like in a modern day church, of like deacons and overseers.
Okay, so
right?
this isn't just priests then. This is like more than just being a priest over people.
Exactly, right. Well, it's not even about more, it's just a different function, right? Because the priest would take the offering, they had the temple duties, they were responsible for doing the atonement sacrifices, the Shabbat, as well as the feast sacrifices. But these guys were to be more like, what do they call them? Appellate court judges, where like the intermediate level judges before you get to the Supreme Court. Priests were judges also, and we see that throughout the Torah. But it's almost like he's appointing intermediate judges amongst the people, leaders amongst the people of the tribes, so that they can hear disputes. And that's why he says if anyone's too hard for them, then bring it to Moses, right? And so I think we see something like that in the days of Solomon too, right? Where the lady with the baby, it was too hard for, I guess, the regular judges, so they brought it to Solomon to try to figure out what's up, and he has a creative solution for it. So I think that's interesting. But now your version of the Bible, every time we see the word law, it exchanges it for Torah.
Yes,
right?
I have the Tree of Life version. So this is
okay.
That's
fine.
Restored some of
That's
the more
great.
Jewish terms,
That's good.
Yeah.
And then it's talked about how long they stayed at Mount Horeb, right? And that was in verses 6 and beyond. Now, of course, a lot of folks, sometimes forget that Mount Sinai is called Mount Horeb, or Horeb, depends on how you're going to say it, the translation. But so just as many things, and even sometimes many people in the scriptures have more than one name that they're referred to by. Just like I mentioned Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, right? He's also called Raul.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So or Ruel or something to that effect. But
Rose.
He's got two names that are actually listed in scripture. That's interesting. But for Mount Sinai, there's two names as well, right? Which is really it may just it may not be that big of a deal for the people at the time. They just knew it to be Mount Sinai and also Mount Horeb.
Right.
And it makes me wonder if one of them was a tribal name and another one was a geographic name, right? Because we could see that, we call New York City its geographical name. It's in the city principality of New York, but also many people refer to as the Big Apple.
Yeah.
So just, I don't know, just a thought. But yeah, Mount Horeb is Mount Sinai, in case anyone gets confused by that.
Well, and even later on here in this portion, we see the various tribes of Nephilim being referred to by different names, by different
That's right.
peoples. So it could also just be, everybody in their own language deciding what they're going to call Mount Sinai.
Yeah, I mean, languages translate.
Yeah.
So that's where you've got, and we're seeing that the names of the Nephilim tribes are going to translate to different things in different tribes. So why not geographical locations like a mountain? Makes sense. But I love Deuteronomy, right, because it gives us a short summation of all the stuff that we read from Exodus up through Numbers. And this is what it's introducing us to in the very beginning. So I'm going to pick back up at verse 19, and then, what else did you wanted to say something about?
Well, I noticed here earlier in the start of the chapter in verse 8, it says, "See, I have set the land before you. Enter and possess the land that Adonai swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to give to them and to their descendants after them." So I think with the Torah portions, a lot of the times, in general, when we're studying the Torah as Christians, as Messianic believers, we tend to look forward. When we're looking at the Torah, we tend to think, okay, what is in here that happened later on? But what's great about the Torah, actually, is it does constantly refer back to itself. So what is it? It's Genesis 15, 16, 17.
Yeah, if we're talking about the land boundaries that were being spoken out to Abraham, I think it's 15.
There's a lot in Genesis talked about the covenant. But Abraham is specifically told about land that he's going to be given, and that land is going to be given to his descendants and their descendants after them. And so if you go back to
It's Genesis 15:18.
15 and 18?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is one of the mentions.
There's a lot of mentions of it.
Yeah, Genesis 15:18.
Yeah, on that day Adonai cut a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your seed from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the Kenite, the Kenzites, the Kadamites, goes through all the ites. But something I just think that people usually fail to notice here is that the land that the children of Israel actually took possession of at this time of the book of Joshua, it wasn't that full territory that was promised to Abraham. So to me, what that tells me and what was being promised to Abraham is actually the promised land.
Right.
The real big piece of land that's going to come down to heaven that we as the seed receive.
It would still be accurate for the Father to tell Moses and all the Israelites, I'm going to take you into the land I swore to your fathers.
Right.
Because you're actually in the area. But you're not possessing the entirety of it in that lifetime. And actually, when we go into Jubilees, we're going to read that there was an even larger portion granted to Shem, of whom Abraham was excited because he knew that Jacob was going to also receive the blessing of Shem, and meaning that land portion, which is a part of the covenant. And this is kingdom in context, guys. So this is why I want to remind folks that that land portion that was originally promised, all the way from Adam down to Abraham to Isaac, Jacob, to everyone in covenant at Mount Sinai, the greater, larger portion is what's going to be the future New Jerusalem. And so that's why we can see in moments, Deuteronomy and after, as the second generation goes into the land, and they do these military campaigns, take out 31 Nephilim kings. But by the time we get to Joshua 13, we see, the Father almost reprimanding Joshua because he says that you haven't finished conquering all the land. There's still some places. And he never finished conquering all the land. So that was very interesting that there was a large portion from, the River Egypt all the way to the Euphrates that they never fully possessed. I think maybe even during the days of Solomon, they still had some issues with the king of Tyre and all these things that Solomon set up trade with, but instead of actually possessing all of that land, which is why I love Genesis 15, verse 18, when it mentioned all the different clans that Abraham their land he was going to be given as a possession. Because one of them in verse 20 talks about the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Rephaim. Yeah. And that's what we're about to read in the rest of this Deuteronomy Torah portion. It's going to explain some of the Rephaim and where they came from, as well as who they were, or what they were called by different people groups in that area. So that's where I will, I guess I'll pick back up.
Yes.
Unless you want to...
Well, I was just going to add that because this is kingdom in context, and it's kind of cliche to do Torah portions. Everybody's got a Torah portion study that they do every week, and really what we want to do differently with this is we want to show people the kingdom in the Torah, because it's all about the gospel of the kingdom. So whereas we're very much programmed to just look for Jesus in the Torah, which is great, he's everywhere, he's all over it, we kind of are trained to just stop there and not look for the kingdom. And what we're seeing here in verse 8, that's the kingdom. What we're seeing in Genesis 15, that land that's promised, that's the kingdom.
It is.
So that was why that verse particularly stood out to me.
So just as the law is embodied in the Messiah, who's the king of the kingdom, also a lot of the details give us great edification and teaching on the aspects of the kingdom as far as where it is. And so there's a ton of symbolism throughout the law as they were doing these things in anticipation of the promise to Abraham, which was to possess, he and his descendants possess this land promised to him forever. Yeah. And you have to, in order to fulfill the forever part, to live eternally in the land as promised, then that means that you have to live forever, right? So there's the first resurrection is inherently included in the gospel of the kingdom, as well as the promised Messiah who would be the king of the kingdom. So it all points to what Jesus went around and was explaining to people as the gospel of the kingdom of God. And that's why we love the Torah portions, because it's rife with it. It's full of it. It's amazing. All right, so let's begin back with verse 19, and I'll pick up. Do you want me to read out of yours, since we just started reading out of yours? Because mine's a slightly different version, but I'm going to put the slides on the screen. It'll be all right.
It's up to you.
Okay, so verse 19 says, "We then set out from Horeb and went across all the great and terrible wilderness you saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, just as the Lord our God had commanded us. When we reached Kadesh Barnea, I said to you, you have reached the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up and take possession of it as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has told you. Do not be afraid or discouraged. And then all of you approached me and said, let's send men ahead of us, so that they may explore the land for us, and bring us back a report about the route we should go up and the cities we will come to. The plan seemed good to me, so I selected 12 men from among you, 1 man for each tribe. They left and went up into the hill country, came to the valley of Eshcol, scouting the land. They took some of the fruit from the land in their hands, carried it down to us, and brought us back a report. The land our God is giving us is good, but you were not willing to go up, rebelling against the command of the Lord your God. You grumbled in your tents, and you said, the Lord brought us out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites so that they would destroy us, because he hated us. Where will we go? Where can we go? Our brothers have discouraged us, saying, the people are larger and taller than we are. The cities are large, fortified to the heavens. We also saw the descendants of the Anakim there. So I said to you, don't be terrified or afraid of them. The Lord your God who goes before you will fight for you, just as you saw him do for you in Egypt. And you saw in the wilderness how the Lord your God carried you as a man carries his son, all along the way you traveled until you reached this place. But in spite of this, you did not trust the Lord your God, who went before you on the journey to seek out a place for you to camp. He went in the fire by night and the cloud by day to guide you on the road you were to travel. And when the Lord heard your words, he grew angry and swore an oath. None of these men in this evil generation will see the good land I swore to give their fathers, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. I always trip up on that word. Sorry, guys. He will see it, and I will give him and his descendants the land on which he has set foot, because he followed the Lord completely. The Lord was angry with me also because of you, and said, you will not enter there either. Joshua, son of Nun, who attends you, he will enter it. Encourage him, for he will enable Israel to inherit it. Your little children who you said would be plunder, your sons who don't know good from evil, will enter there. I will give them the land, and they will take possession of it. But you are to turn back and head for the wilderness by way of the Red Sea. And you answered me, we have sinned against the Lord. We will go up and fight, just as the Lord our God commanded us. Then each of you put on his weapons of war and thought it would be easy to go up into the hill country. But the Lord said to me, tell them, don't go up and fight, for I am not with you to keep you from being defeated by your enemies. So I spoke to you, but you didn't listen. You rebelled against the Lord's command, and defiantly went up into the hill country. Then the Amorites who lived there came out against you and chased you like a swarm of bees. They routed you from Seir as far as Hormah. And when you returned, you wept before the Lord, but he didn't listen to your requests or pay attention to you. For this reason you stayed in Kadesh. For this reason you stayed in Kadesh as long as you did. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there, because this is a retelling of what we saw in Numbers 14 and 15. But it's heartbreaking that we have a lot of things in here that I would like to discuss, because he's reminding them why 40 years later they're finally about to go in, and why all the men of war had already died off. And I think it's interesting that they're told this is the land that we're going to go to. They get to the land, and then he's like, going in. But instead of saying going in, the men say, okay, well, let's scout it out first, right? And then let's see what we're dealing with. Yeah. And then 2 out of the 10 said, we got this, we can take them. The other 10, even though they did agree that it was good land, because remember they brought back the grapes, the big grapes, right, with them, right? They agreed that it was good land, but they also, the 10 of the 2 men out of the 12, they had a bad report in the sense that they had no faith in saying that we can't do this. The guys are too big. That the Anakim are there as well. The cities are fortified. We can't do this. And Joshua and Caleb, of course, they were like, yeah, we can. God's with us. Apparently, they remembered what God was reminding them in this passage, how he helped them in Egypt, because it was just 2 short years before that,
yeah,
right? So it was like
it
wasn't that long ago. And they remembered it, but the other guys were already succumbed to fear at that point, which is heartbreaking, because it cost them 38 more years. What's interesting though is that we get a mention of the Anakim in here, because that is one of the Rephaim that we see expressed to us later on in chapter 2. And I think that's, like I was saying, they went into the valley of Eshcol. When they came back, they were at a place where they just absolutely could not believe that God continued to help them further, which is amazing. But at the same time, I've experienced that in my own life, to be honest with you.
I mean, isn't it? It's really just the age-old fight between fear and faith. And you're either going to have faith or you're going to be in fear.
It is. It is. And it's funny to me because from everything we see in history about ancient Egypt, I can pretty confidently assume that wasn't the first time they had seen giants.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, ancient Egypt was rife with giants. I mean, they had all kinds of Nephilim activity. I mean,
well, we can see their statues and.
Yeah, I mean, even their hieroglyphs and the depictions about them walking beside elephants and giraffes, and
right.
I mean, and the actual stories from ancient Egypt and how the quote unquote gods were the ruling class and they were bigger, much bigger than the regular people. So, but they get in here to the land of Canaan where the Amorites are, and they're like, oh my gosh, these guys are even bigger, and their cities are fortified, and what are we going to do? And it's very interesting because I don't know what they think what they thought they were gonna do. They were not gonna go back to Egypt, but I guess, well, we remember Numbers 14 is followed by number 16 where we have the rebellion of Korah.
Right.
And
it seems like they were wishy-washy and went back and forth the whole time.
Yeah, it
even
seems like
coming out of Egypt.
That's true. That's true. It's like a series of events that were kind of weeding out the faithless, if you will, and really determining who was going to trust God for real and who was just trying to follow the crowd and get out of bondage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to see. And so anyway,
separating the tares from the wheat, as it were.
Possibly, but they're doing it by their own actions. They're not it's not being forcibly done with angels as when the kingdom comes.
Right.
Sweetie, do you want to pick up chapter 2?
Sure. All right. Then we turned and journeyed into the wilderness by way of the Sea of Reeds, just as Adonai told me. We went around the hill country of Seir for many days. Adonai spoke to me, saying, you have gone around this hill country long enough. Turn to the north. Command the people, saying, you are about to cross into the territory of your relatives, the sons of Esau, who dwell in Seir. They will be afraid of you, so be very careful. Do not provoke them, for I will not give you any of their land, not even a footprint, because I have given the hill country of Seir to Esau as a possession. You are to buy food from them for money so that you may eat, and you are also to buy water from them for money so that you may drink. For Adonai your God has blessed you in all the work of your hand. He has known your wanderings through this great wilderness. These 40 years, Adonai your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. So we went on past our relatives, the sons of Esau, who dwell in Seir, away from the way of the Arabah from Eloth and Ezion-Geber. We turned and passed by the way of the wilderness of Moab. Adonai said to me, do not harass Moab or engage them in battle, for I will not give you any of his land for a possession, because I have given Ar to the children of Lot for a possession. The Emim used to live there, a great and numerous people, as tall as the Anakim. These people are also considered Rephaim, like the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emim. Now the Horites used to live in Seir, but the sons of Esau drove them out and destroyed them from before themselves and settled in their place, just as Israel did to the land of its possession that Adonai gave to them. Now rise up and cross over the valley of Zered. So we went over to the valley of Zered. The time that we traveled from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed over the valley of Zered was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of war from within the camp came to an end, as Adonai had sworn to them. Indeed, the hand of Adonai was against them, to destroy them from within the camp until they came to their end.
I love this chapter because it gives us a nice breakdown of the Anakim and what they were regarded as by other people, which is really helpful for us in a variety of ways. Because we see the Horites later, right? And we also get a little bit of follow-up from Genesis 19 in this little moment with Lot's descendants, the Ammonites, the Moabites, right? The ill-gotten children of Lot's daughters and Lot, and that sordid story. And then they're flourishing 400 years later down the road. And then we even get a little mention of Esau's descendants, which is interesting, how they were actually pushing out some of the Nephilim clans as well.
And Esau was given a possession in that land.
He was given a possession in that area, which is interesting. But there's, unfortunately, in the long run, Esau doesn't get the goods.
We all know how God feels about Esau.
Yes, we do. We understand that. But as far as, just explaining some of the different names that the Rephaim, whom we saw was an area of land that was promised to Abraham in Genesis 15 verse 20, was one of the clans and the areas mentioned, and it says that they were called the Emim, right?
Yep.
And the Anakim. Basically, all three words are very almost synonymous, and that's what the descendants of Lot refer to them as, the Emim. So that's just what I love about this. The reason why I'm talking about it is because here's an example of the Father going out of his way to explain to us the concepts, so we're not confused, by giving us what different languages called these concepts, so that we're not confused. So he's taking time in his Torah. Now remember, this is the mathematically encoded Torah, but he's taken the time within the mathematically encoded Torah to go out of his way and say, hey, Lot's descendants used to call these guys something else. This is what these are. That's what these are. He didn't have to do that, right? But he's doing that so that we're not confused, and it's letting us know that the Father is very willing to call other things by different names, right? And he's even telling the readers of Deuteronomy, which in this moment would be all the hearers of the descendants of Israel in the days of Moses' death, that hey, there's language translations happening out there, right? Because they all knew about the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11. So, and many of you may know why I'm kind of saying that, but there's this idea that God only wants to use Hebrew, and He's the one who confounded the languages.
Yeah.
So I think, and we see many examples of this also in the Brit, where we get the Latin and the Greek translated for us back to the Hebrew, so we can know why it's being called something, and who the people of the day refer to it as well. So God will reach us in all of our languages is the good news of that. Okay. So but then we also get some of the geographical place where many of these things are happening, which I like. And if we put these things up on a map, you would have a lot of fun seeing kind of some of the places they moved, because we get to see where the descendants of Lot ended up flourishing, the descendants of Esau. What's interesting that you and I have talked about quite often is we don't get we get it in Genesis, but later on in these days, during the journeys of the Israelites out of Exodus, we don't get a lot of mentions of Abraham's Ishmael's descendants,
right?
Abraham's first son, which I think is interesting, because he also received an inheritance.
Ishmael had 12 sons,
and they were called princes.
Yes,
yeah.
And Hagar was told that she and Ishmael would be blessed.
Yeah.
And that is definitely something that, and I've tried to research it, and it seems like a lot of people have tried to research back through those lines, and there's not a whole lot that can be found. I mean, we all kind of just speculate and know that the Arabs and the Muslims came from Ishmael, but I mean, there really isn't anything to back anything up to be said about what happened to Ishmael and his 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Ishmael, what happened to them after they're kind of just, not mentioned in the story anymore.
So it's kind of interesting for those who care about the genealogy. But what's interesting is one of the extra biblicals, I believe it's the book of Jasher, but he talks about how Ishmael came to visit Abraham, and Abraham loved him and cared for him, and that Ishmael was a righteous man. That he ended up becoming a man of righteousness because he followed the ways of his father. Abraham was teaching the law, commended for doing the law, and was a righteous man. And so why wouldn't he teach his firstborn son how to be righteous?
Well, and if you think about it, Abraham, until Isaac came along, it seems like Abraham and Sarah might have thought Ishmael was the promised son.
Yeah, so you better teach him kingdom behavior.
He would have been being taught the kingdom behavior of the Torah. So.
And we know that according to Hebrews 11 and many other places that Abraham knew about the kingdom to come. Right? That's why he said he looked for a city built by the hands of God. And if that's the case, he's going to tell all of his kids that this is the story, this is the future, this is our hope, our anticipation. I think point is, the reason why we're saying all that, okay, what are we reading about here in Deuteronomy 2? We're reading about the Ammonites, the Moabites, descendants of Lot. Hebrews 11 calls Lot a righteous man whose soul is afflicted from living in Sodom and Gomorrah area. We see also Genesis 19 that Lot does some bad things. It's not good, right? Even righteous men can do bad things, okay? His was a unique situation where, I guess they thought there was no other option, but that's a different discussion for a different Torah portion. The point is,
we'll get to that next year.
The point is, Lot was the nephew of Abraham, and to the point where Abraham, cared for him, loved him enough to go fight Nephilim kings to get him back from Kedorlaomer, right? And that's, we're talking about a close-knit family. Even though they had a disagreement on their cattle or their sheep and grazing, and they took different portions of land, they still loved and cared for each other. And I promise you, Abraham told everyone in his life about what he knew about the coming Messiah, the gospel of the kingdom of God that was to happen, why he was doing the commandments of Yahweh, or what he would call the Almighty. Because you remember Exodus 3 tells us, with Moses, the angel in the burning bush is telling Moses that the Almighty didn't reveal himself as Yahweh to the patriarchs, but just by the term the Almighty. So Abraham's following the ways of the Almighty, and he's getting angelic visitations by people. I promise you, he's telling everyone in his life what that's about, why he's making these decisions, why he's uprooting his family and leaving the land of the Chaldees and living as a sojourner in the land of Canaan. And because it's a part of the promise, it was a part of the whole thing. I'm sure they heard about the moment he took, Isaac up to the mountain with all the wood without the sacrifice, and they're like, "What's up with that?" Right? They probably heard the story when they got back, because it was a miraculous moment, a wonderful moment, which the Book of Jubilees calls the final test. No. Actually, it was the 9th test. The 10th test was when Sarah died. But apparently, Book of Jubilees and extra biblical, which we're going to read out of later, discusses how Abraham was tested 10 times in his life. And one of those moments, and to see about his faith, to see about his true heart for God, and one of those moments was in Genesis 22 with Isaac on the mountaintop. So I promise you, all the family, the connected, immediate, and distant family, all heard about that moment with Isaac, right? So I love this concept. When we have a chance to really put it in realistic terms, okay? These are real people, they had real families, they had real sources of income, real problems, real joys, struggles, triumphs, and all the way we have this patriarch who is forgive the use of the word, as far as the faith goes, this guy is a giant in the faith, all right? This is, I know, right? But this is
heavy hitter.
Right, this Abraham guy, he's no joke. God loved Abraham because he was faithful to him, and he was a vocal for him. How Abraham is talking about God, man. He's an evangelist, brothers. Like this guy, he was sharing the word, sharing the kingdom, and if we believe Jasher, it says that he even set up shop at the end of his life where he would welcome travelers in and teach them the ways of the Almighty. So he's like an Airbnb, if you will, and these people are coming in, and he's just like using that opportunity to be like, oh hey, let me tell you about the Almighty, the Creator, and the coming kingdom of God.
He's preaching the gospel to all creatures.
He is preaching the gospel to all creatures. There's no wonder in Genesis 26:5 we have him being commended by the Father, by Yahweh, for keeping his statutes, commands, decrees, and everything. And I promise you, he taught it to his family. I promise you, his extended family, Lot, knew all about it. Do you think? And to me, this is what we theorized. One time we were reading about Genesis 19 and Lot's daughters, the whole Sodom and Gomorrah event, right, where the fire's raining down. Lot's daughters thought it was the end of the world.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so let's just think about this for a minute. And I don't want to take too long with this. Okay?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a rabbit trail.
But it matters too, in my opinion, to understanding, their mentality as far as, can we trace Abraham expressing these ideas to his family, both, extended and immediate, right? And Lot's daughters thought it was the end of the world. Why?
Well, because they had been told about the destruction of the world with fire in the last days. Would that be why?
That's a good guess, sweetie.
They might have thought they were witnessing prophecy being fulfilled. Not knowing any better.
That's right, because it does say it's going to rain fire and brimstone again. I was going to do a little more lead up to that, but that's fine. That's fine.
Well, you set me up for it.
Yes, you did great. That was perfect. Whatever. I don't need to take too much time with it anyway.
Yeah.
The point is, it's very plausible that Lot's daughters thought it was the end of the world, because what was going on with Sodom and Gomorrah very similar to what we see in the day of the Lord at the return of Messiah with the coming kingdom of God. So that means if they already knew about it, to them that was the thought, that was the trigger, that, oh my gosh. That's, yes, admittedly that's a little bit of speculation, but the point is, what I would confidently say is that Abraham spoke what he knew about the Father, the revelations he was given, and about the Torah. He taught Torah to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and anyone that was around him, including Lot. That's how Lot could even be called a righteous man. The definition of being called a righteous man is someone who's obeying Torah. So that's why his soul was afflicted trying to keep Torah while living in Sodom and Gomorrah in the area there, right? So I think that it's very interesting to look at it from this perspective of Torah, as we see these people that interact with Abraham's life, and we can start to see that all throughout these regions, even though the Israelites had been away from this area and in the land of Egypt and then been subjugated for some time, because they went down there originally under good circumstances.
Right.
But then over time, different change of power happened. Joseph's dead. 100 years later, another change of power happens. We see Assyria invaded. Now an Assyrian king is over Egypt, and he doesn't know Moses doesn't know the Israelites as we see in the text in Exodus. Rises up, decides he wants to wipe out the Hebrews and subjugate them, and we start to see mass oppression on the Hebrew people. Well, isn't it interesting that meanwhile, in the land area of Canaan, south and southeast and below, we've got these people that used to interact with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our family members that are flourishing. And they're fighting the Nephilim, who had started to try to set up shop in this area, whom Yahweh tells us clearly he's bringing Israel in as an military arm, if you will, to try to wipe them out of the land, because apparently at that point their sin is full. Because remember, the sin had not yet been full, but suddenly it gets full and it's time to act. Now we know that Yahweh uses some natural circumstances to kind of lead the way and soften up the hot spots, if you will, but then he brings in the Israelis as an army group marching up into the land. But what I'm trying to say is, before all that, we've got these guys already being attacked by the extended relatives of Abraham, who would have known why they would have to attack them.
Right.
Because they're in the land of promise they're not supposed to be.
Yeah.
Right? They're invading in the land of promise, and that's what we're going to read later on in the rest of chapter 2. So, because we're going to see where these people actually came from, which is interesting. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting all excited because there's a lot in here.
Reeling you back in.
Sorry, baby. All right, okay. So this is chapter 2. Were you reading or was I reading?
You were reading.
Okay, let's go to verse 16. Okay.
No, wait, I was reading. No, you go ahead.
Do you want me to read?
You go ahead.
Okay, I'll just start with 16. It says, "When all the fighting men had died among the people, the Lord spoke to me. Today you are going to cross the border of Moab at Ar. When you get close to the Ammonites, don't show any hostility to them or fight with them, for I will not give you any of the Ammonites' land as a possession. I have given it as a possession to the descendants of Lot. This too used to be regarded as the land of Rephaim. The Rephaim lived there previously, though the Ammonites called them the Zemzumim, a great and numerous people, tall as the Anakim. The Lord destroyed the Rephaim at the advances of the Ammonites, so that they drove them out and settled in their place. This was just as he had done for the descendants of Esau, who lived in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites before them, drove them out, and the descendants of Esau have lived in their place until now. The Caphtorim, who came from Caphtor, destroyed the Avim, who lived in villages as far as Gaza, and settled in their place." And I want to stop real quick, because that was what I was alluding to. The Caphtorim came from the island of Caphtor, right? We see this in Genesis 10, and as it goes through a summary over time of the island of the Table of Nations, the Caphtorim, if I'm not mistaken, are descendants of Japheth, and they actually it's kind of where the idea of the giants post-flood started. So this is where we get much of the lore, if you will, of ancient mythology for the Greeks. Is the island of Crete is what it's called today, but back in the day it was called the island of Caphtor. Some translations spell the K, some is what's the Caphtor. Just depends on your translation. So we have a couple of places, not only the descendants of Ham, but also just a few miles above them in the water in the island of Crete. So right above the area of Egypt, you've got the island of Crete, and then you've also got Sumeria which we also have stories of that, which would have been the southeastern portion of the land of the Chaldea, which is where Nimrod was, and we all know about Nimrod. So this is fascinating because it's kind of subtly just dropping these little hints in here just as tracers, just to try to tell us, like the Ammonites, like I just talked about, the descendants of Lot, they pushed out the Zamzummim, who were basically just the Rephaim, but they called them by their own language the Zamzummim, right? So, and they were also tall like the Anakim and everything. And then it just switches modes suddenly. It goes to the Captorim, who came from Caftor. And you're like, what's that? Who are we talking about? Well, these are the origins of the Greeks and the giants that originated in the island of Crete. And so I think it's fascinating. But the point is, God's kind of showing you that between Esau, the Moabites, the Ammonites, they were given a possession in this area, and they too, just like the Israelites, had to go in and clear out people, right? People that were not supposed to be there. So I think this is fascinating. And what I'm getting at is, as I think that because of Abraham's descendants and Abraham knowing the gospel of the kingdom of God and teaching Torah, I think we're going to see a lot of people in the kingdom we had no clue about, right? Especially from these descendants, if you will. But just a thought, just a speculation.
Well, and just one thing that I have always tended to glaze over that I just realized as we were reading this is how it talks about in, let's see here, around verse 20 through 23, a great numerous people as tall as the Anakim, but Adonai destroyed them from before them, and the Ammonites dispossessed them and settled in their place. It was just as Adonai had done for the sons of Esau. So again, we all have this narrative in our head of, we all know how God feels about Esau, but clearly God is still working through the sons of Esau in some form or fashion, because it's saying he, just like he did for the children of Israel, cleared people out of the way. I mean, Esau got a portion, it seems like, and so did his descendants. So
now Esau himself may not have followed the Lord.
Yeah.
But that doesn't speak for his descendants.
Right.
You can't just throw a blanket cover of disobedience over everybody just because their great-granddad had a bad attitude.
Well, and just like Ishmael was raised in a righteous household of Abraham, Esau was raised in a righteous household. I mean, he was raised with that. He may not have kept in that way, when he grew up from being a child, but I mean, he was raised with the same, Torah as Jacob was. So.
And as we look in Jubilees, he and Jacob interacted later on in their life. We see that in Genesis as well. Yeah. But so there was, they may not have been shared every feast day together. Let's just put it like that. But the point is, there's interaction there, okay, and there's understanding of Jacob is living his life according to Torah and all of his family and all the descendants therein, many of whom were carried over from his father Isaac's house, who carried over from Abraham's household. Yeah. Many of these people were not actually blood relatives, but they came from Assyria. That's a different video. But the point is, there's a lot going on there about how the goodness of the Torah which is the behavior of the kingdom, is being spread to many different people groups, to whomever believed in faith and obedience. Right? That's the good news. All right. So verse 24. The Lord also said, "Get up, move out, cross the Arnon Valley. See, I have handed Sihon the Amorite, the king of Heshbon, and his land over to you. Begin to take possession of it. Engage him in battle. Today I will begin to put the fear and dread of you and the peoples everywhere under heaven. They will hear the report of you, and then tremble and be in anguish because of you." So I sent messengers with an offer of peace to Sihon, king of Heshbon, from the wilderness of Kedemoth, saying, "Let us travel through your land. We will keep strictly to the highway. We will not turn to the right or to the left. You can sell us food in exchange for silver so we may eat, and give us water for silver so we may drink. Only let us travel through on foot, just as the descendants of Esau who live in Seir did for us, and the Moabites who live in Ar did for us, until we cross the Jordan into the land the Lord our God is giving us." But the king of Heshbon, Sihon, would not let us travel through his land, for the Lord your God made his spirit stubborn and his heart obstinate in order to hand him over to you, as has now taken place. This is very similar to what we saw with Pharaoh, right, from Egypt. Interesting. Then the Lord said to me, "See, I have begun to give Sihon and his land to you. Begin to take possession of it." So Sihon and his whole army came out against us for battle at Jahaz. The Lord our God handed him over to us, and we defeated him, his sons, and his whole army. At that time we captured all his cities and completely destroyed the people of every city, including the women and children, we left no survivors. We took only the livestock and the spoil from the cities we captured as plunder for ourselves. There was no city that was inaccessible to us. From the, do you know how to say that word? I don't really know how to say that word. From the ARR, I don't know, guys. Any help in the comments?
Arrowware.
On the rim of the Arnon Valley, along with the city and the valley, even as far as Gilead, the Lord our God gave everything to us. But you did not go near the Ammonites' land, all along the bank of the Jabbok River, and the cities of the hill country, everything the Lord our God had commanded. Okay, it's a lot of fun stuff here. So, but basically, they're about to get into a skirmish, or they got into a skirmish with Sihon, right? And we know that he was the brother of Og, the original.
I didn't know
OG.
that.
Yeah.
The original OG.
Well, I mean, his name's Og. It's OG. He's literally the first time we see the word OG. He's got to be the original OG. Anyway,
I'll give you that. I'll give it
to you. Is there anything you'd like to comment on that portion, my love?
I don't think anything necessarily stood out to me in that one. I mean,
pick up with chapter 3.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, we're going to verse 22.
Okay. Next we turned and went up the way to the Bashan. King Og of the Bashan came out against us, he and all his people, for battle at Edrei. But Adonai said to me, do not fear him, for I have handed him over and all his people and his land. You will do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon. So Adonai our God also handed over King Og of the Bashan and all his people, and we struck him down until no survivor was left. We captured all his cities at that time. There was not a town that we did not take from them. 60 cities, the whole region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in the Bashan. All these were cities fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, in addition to a great many unwalled towns. We utterly destroyed them, just as we did to Sihon, king of Heshbon, utterly destroying every city, men, women, and children. But all the livestock and the spoils of the cities we took as plunder for ourselves. So at that time we took from the land of the 2 kings of the Amorites the land across the Jordan, from the valley of Arnon to Mount Hermon. Sidonians call Hermon Sirion, and the Amorites call it Senir. We took all the cities of the plain, and all the Gilead, and all the Bashan, as far as Salcah and Edrei, cities of the kingdom of Og in the Bashan. For only King Og of the Bashan survived from the remnant of the Rephaim. In fact, his bed was made of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the Ammonites? 9 cubits was its length, and 4 cubits its width, according to the cubit of a man. This land we took in possession at that time, from Aroer by the valley of Arnon, and half the hill country of the Gilead and its cities, I gave to the Reubenites and Gadites. The rest of the Gilead and all of the Bashan, the kingdom of Og, I gave to the half-tribe of Manasseh, all the region of the Argob. All the Bashan is called the land of the Rephaim. Jair, son of Manasseh, took all the region of Argob, as far as the border of the Geshurites and the Maacathites. He called them the Bashan after his own name, Havoth Jair's villages, as it is the case to this day. To Machir I gave the Gilead. To the Reubenites and Gadites I gave from the Gilead as far as the valley of Arnon, the middle of the valley as the border, and as far as Jabbok, the valley that is the border of the sons of Ammon, and the Arabah with the Jordan as the border from the Kinneret as far as the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, under the slopes of Pisgah eastward. I commanded you at that time, saying, Adonai your God has given you this land to possess it. Ready for battle, you will cross over ahead of your brothers, Bnei Yisrael, all the men of valor. Only your wives and little ones and your livestock, I know that you have much livestock, may stay in your cities that I have given you, until Adonai gives rest to your brothers as he has for you, and they also possess the land that Adonai your God is giving them across the Jordan. Then you may return, each man to his possession that I have given you. I commanded Joshua at that time, saying, your eyes have seen all that Adonai your God has done to these 2 kings. Adonai will do the same to all the kingdoms you are about to cross into. You must not fear them, for it is Adonai your God who fights for you.
That's a lot of fun. I gave you that portion because it has all the hard words to read.
Gee, thanks.
All right. Okay. So there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
A lot of transitioning happening. You know, they took out Og, the OG. He was not very OG, and he, in fact, is now deceased. So basically, They handled him thoroughly. Now remember, Sihon and Og are referenced again later in Joshua 3.
Yes.
When Rahab the spy is being a spy, if you will. She actually had another profession, but she's acting as a spy, and she's talking to the spies of Israel, and she's giving them information. And while she's doing that, she's like, "Oh, you are the people in the deserts that has all of the men in our city trembling, right?"
Yeah.
Because they had heard what the Israelites did to Og and Sihon, the two Amorite brothers.
Which he tells them is going to happen. People
Yeah.
are going to hear of this, and they're going to be afraid of you before you
Yes.
even get there.
And we see the fulfillment of that in Joshua 3 through 6. So I think that's fascinating. There's something I wanted to point out real quick. That's in verse. I know it seems like it's insignificant, but something popped in my head. Verse 19. It says, "But you, your wives, your young children, and livestock. I know that you have a lot of livestock. Will remain in the cities I've given you." All right. So it's been 40 years. So they've had time to grow their livestock, right? They must have come out of Egypt with livestock because they immediately started doing sacrifices.
Yeah.
Right. That was the whole point of them leaving, is so they could go worship on the mountain, on Mount Sinai to God,
Yeah.
which Jubilees chapter 3 tells us is one of God's special places on the earth that they already knew about. So that's why they were trying to get there to go
Yeah.
worship, and they already knew that worship was an altar sacrifice with an animal, so they already knew Levitical instructions for how to worship God and the definition of that according to Torah. So here, let me ask you something. They're in the wilderness. How do they? I mean, and they're there for 40 years, but how do they have a lot of livestock now? Where do they get all this food to feed their animals?
I don't know.
I don't either. Because remember, they were eating manna up until the time when they went to Jericho.
True.
I mean, they had other things to eat. I'm just saying that was a huge part of their diet, right? So it's possible they were feeding some manna to the livestock. It's
guess I
possible.
never thought about
It doesn't
that.
really say it, but it's possible. But that isn't even what I really wanted to point out. What I was wanting to ask is, do you remember Jacob when he's working for Laban, and he has this idea to like put the stick at the river and separate, some of the livestock, and he took
Yeah.
the pure ones, the ones without spot and blemish, and then they multiplied faster over time. I'm wondering if that practice was still being used by his descendants, which allowed them to propagate more livestock in this time period at a faster rate. So they have a whole bunch of livestock now that they're going into the land. It's not just a couple million people. It's a couple million, lots of livestock as well. Anywhere from 2 to 3 million units, if I could put it like that, units of livestock that are running around with them. Because they took over all these cities, 60 just from Og, right, and his kingdom. So they're step right in, fill them up with people and livestock, and just set up shop. The city's already built for you.
Clearly, that's the way they were multiplying livestock, was by taking livestock as plunder from the cities that they were destroying.
Yes.
So there was that.
Yes.
But I would say
It
it's
says
probably,
in verse 7 they took all the livestock.
Yeah,
We get
I
that.
would say it's probably safe to assume that in the same way Jacob would have been passing down teachings of Yahweh to his descendants, he would be passing down the family business and how to
I just
how
always
to
wondered
run that.
if he ever continued that practice that he did with Laban, and
It seems like it was super effective, so
Yeah.
I would think, he probably
if
told that little trade secret.
I don't know if anyone raises sheep or goats or lamb anyone watching, but if you do, maybe put in the comments if that's a practice that's being used today, and how to quickly multiply sheep, and if not, maybe try it, and you can thank us later. I don't know. So, I don't know. It could be something. If people aren't using that technique today, we have a lot of sheep farms, west of here. So we could go ask them, I guess, sometime. But they just seem to be dirty in a big corral. They don't seem to be doing anything special with those. So, out,
sure.
Out
On the way to Greeley.
So it's anyway. All I'm trying to say is I've always wondered, but just they're going through supposedly a wilderness without. I don't know where the food source came from. Is what I'm getting at. Beyond the manna and beyond. I mean, it's not like they had traveling greenhouses with them so they could grow a bunch of produce, or they could grow. I don't know. It's just interesting stuff. And if anyone does know, Put it in the comments for us.
Any suggestions? I mean, I would think there was also, they could also plunder food from the cities they were.
Well, they did have all the silver and gold from Egypt,
Yeah.
just like they offered King Sihon, we'll give you silver for food. Maybe from the Ammonites and the Moabites, and they passed through there peacefully. They did buy stuff for themselves and for their livestock. But that was later, that was 38 years after the fact. I'm talking about.
I mean, he does say, I fed you manna in the desert for 40 years. I mean, he does say that. So, I mean, we at least know.
That's true.
I mean, as they were.
That's something. All right.
Yeah. So what we're doing with our portions is going to be a little different. Like I already said, we want to focus on the kingdom in the Torah, but instead of just Googling Torah portions and looking for what other places have paired from the prophets and the Brit with the Torah, we've decided to just study the Torah portion ourselves and then find what we think goes with it best. Because a lot of times when I would be following along with the Torah portions that everybody just Googles, I would read things in the prophets and the Brit and think, well, what does that have to do with the Torah portion? I mean, I would kind of just have to figure it out. So Sean and I, we kind of just want to, kind of do our own thing with, pairings with the Torah portions. And we know a lot of people are interested in the extra biblical texts, and some of them he and I have studied, and Sean especially has studied some of these way longer than I have, and he's confident in using some of them to pair with the Torah because he has not found any contradictions to the Torah in them. So what did we pair from the prophets with this portion?
Book of Psalms.
Okay.
And I believe it's Psalm 135, is it verse 11 or 12?
So starting in Psalm 135 verse 8, he struck down the firstborn of Egypt, both man and beast. He sent signs and wonders among you, O Egypt, on Pharaoh and all his servants. He struck down many nations and slew many mighty kings. Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, and all the kingdoms of Canaan, and gave their land as an inheritance to his people Israel. So we have that paired.
Yes. And then we also did Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 24. And let's see if I can pull that up real quick.
And what's kind of the setting of this prayer that, we see Israel getting together in sackcloth and ashes to repent. What's going on here in
this
the timeline?
Is the return of the exiles, right?
From Babylon?
From Babylon,
okay.
Yeah. They're trying to celebrate the Feast of Booths, is what's going on here.
That's right.
So they're going to do a prayer. And this is the day of Nehemiah. Also, Ezra's alive at the time. So this is, we get Ezra's amazing because, anyway. We get Ezra and Nehemiah in the same generation, and they're trying to celebrate the Feast of Booths in chapter 8. And then on the 24th day of the month is when they assemble for fasting, and because they're doing, basically it's like national confession time, like all the bad stuff that they were not keeping the law or doing in Babylon, all the descendants, because apparently in the first few chapters of Ezra it even tells us that some of the priests that were alive before they went into exile were still alive 70 years later. They're either over 90 or they were they were of Levites who were maybe not inducted as a priest yet in their service, right, but were just children of fathers who were priests, and so they saw the original temple before it was destroyed, and then now they come back to see it being rebuilt, after they were allowed to go back to the land and start rebuilding the temple. That even took some time because they were like partially having to fight people off while they were actually building it at the same time. But in this moment here in Nehemiah 9, we have, this idea that they're all going to come around and they're all going to confess their sin and they're going to pray to God and celebrating the Feast of Booths, which, is interesting, right? Because Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, right? That's on the 10th, right, of that month. But it looks like this happens on the 24th day, which is what Nehemiah 1 says. So that's, if anyone wants to study that out, that's interesting. Now, don't get me wrong, you can confess your sin any day.
Yeah, confession of sin is a
it doesn't have to wait until one day of the year.
Occurrence,
Yeah. But I just think that was interesting, and this could be because they were still trying to read the law, understand the law, learn the law, because a few chapters earlier, if I'm not mistaken, they found the law, or they didn't find it, but they had the Levites come in and interpret it, because now they were speaking, this new generation, most of them were speaking an Assyrian language, so they had to interpret it back into Hebrew, and when they were understanding it, they were weeping, because they were like, whoa, we haven't been keeping this stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's pretty fascinating. So I'm just going to go ahead and start reading. It's in chapter 9, verse 1. It says, on the 24th day of this month, the Israelites assembled. They were fasting, wearing sackcloth, and had put dust on their heads. Those of Israelite descent separated themselves from all foreigners. And they stood and confessed their sins and the guilt of their fathers while they stood in their places. They read from the book of the law of the Lord for their God for a fourth of the day, and spent another fourth of the day in confession and worship of the Lord their God. This is amazing, guys. I mean, this is 1 John 1:9, right? That if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us of all unrighteousness. We have the high priest Yeshua working in our stead. Back then they still had Levites working in their stead, and a high priest of those Levites. And that was part of the Leviticus 16 ordinances for the priests and Levites, was to take the confession, right? They were to then place it on the Azazel goat. But at the same time, that was a special Yom Kippur occasion. Every Shabbat they did a sacrifice for sin atonement. Every Shabbat. So the family, the elder, the head of the family, usually the father or grandfather, he's going to bring up your sacrifice that you needed for your confession on Shabbat, give it to the priests. They then do the ordinance sacrifice of that animal, do their rituals with the blood, and then you actually get the meat to eat for yourself and your family, because that was part of your deal. But anyway, so we have this constant idea of confession all throughout the Old Testament, of getting your heart right so that your walk can be right too. Okay. Verse 4 says, Yeshua Bani. I should have had you read this. This has got a bunch of bad, hard words.
Let me take care of it.
No, I'm just playing. I get it. It's Yeshua Bani Kadmiel Shebaniah Buni Sherebiah Bani Chanani. Isn't that yogurt? No?
No, it's something different. I have some in the fridge.
There's some Greek yogurt that's Chanani?
Chobani.
Oh, it's Chobani. Okay, sorry. All right, sorry about that. So Chanani stood on the raised platform built for the Levites and cried out loudly to the Lord their God. Then the Levites, Jeshua, Kadmiel, Bani, Hashbani, Sherebiah, Hodiah, Shebaniah, and Pethahiah, said, Stand up, bless the Lord your God from everlasting to everlasting. Praise your glorious name, and may be exalted above all blessing and praise. You alone are the Lord. You created the heavens, the highest heavens, with all their hosts, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to all of them, and the heavenly hosts worship you. You are the Lord God, who chose Abram, brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans, and changed his name to Abraham. You found his heart faithful in your sight, and made a covenant with him to give the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Girgashites, to give it to his descendants. You have kept your promise, and you are righteous. I'm going to stop right there, right? Well, not only is this pairing, because we're reading what we were talking about earlier with Deuteronomy, talking about the land of promise, same promise that was given to Abraham in Genesis 15, but, sweetie, it says that these guys are praying and saying to God that you have kept your promise, and you are righteous.
Yeah.
These guys just got out of 70 years of exile. The northern kingdom and the 10 tribes are scattered.
Still scattered?
The remaining Levites, Benjaminites, and Judites, right? The Yehudi, they're coming back into the land. That's only 3 out of the 12. How is he keeping their promise? How is these words in this prayer true? They're not.
Why don't you tell us?
I'm just saying, like they don't own the land from the river Egypt,
right,
which is the Nile, to the Euphrates. They've just been scattered from it. They lost their 2 kingdoms, which was not cool to begin with, to have 2 kingdoms. They're supposed to be one people. But so what I'm saying is, these guys are repeating the gospel of the kingdom of God in their prayer. This is the promise of the covenant to Abraham. They're not living in the fulfillment of it.
Right.
They're speaking in faith that the Father's going to keep his promise and give this to them. Why? Because they know it's not about their immediate life.
Right.
It's about the life to come. The law, what does it say? Do these and you will live.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they all died.
And we're going to die,
We're
most
gonna
likely.
die, right? The first death is not
Yeah.
what we're to worry about. It's the second death that you don't want to experience, right? That's where Yeshua says in Matthew 10:28, it's do not fear those who kill the body. but He, the one God who can kill the soul and the body, in Gehenna, which is the lake of fire. So that's the second death. In the promise to Abraham was this idea of the covenant that I'm going to give this to you and your descendants, who's going to be as numerous as the stars in heaven, as the sand on the seashore. I'm going to give them this land forever. You guys can live there forever. Well, none of this generation in the day of Nehemiah is going to live there forever. They just got back into it after an entire generation of being away.
Yeah.
So they're not seeing the fulfillment of this. Their ancestors didn't see it. They all died. They know the gospel, the kingdom of God is about the future. It's about the promise. Just like Abraham knew Isaac could be resurrected because he was the Lord of the living and not the dead. In order to be the Lord of the living means you have to be alive. He's the Lord of the resurrection. And this is the idea that they all knew the fundamental premise of the gospel, the kingdom of God, and they're praying it as they repeat the covenant to Abraham. This is amazing, guys. I just hope that you guys are catching this. Verse 9, he says, "You saw the oppression of our ancestors in Egypt, and you heard their cry at the Red Sea. You performed signs and wonders against Pharaoh, all his officials, all the people of his land. You knew how arrogantly they treated our ancestors. You made a name for yourself that endures to this day. You divided the sea before them, and they crossed through it on dry ground. You hurled their pursuers into the depths like a stone. You led them with a pillar, into churning waters, like a stone into churning waters. You led them with a pillar of cloud by day and with a pillar of fire by night to illuminate the way they should go. You came down on Mount Sinai and spoke to them from heaven. You gave them impartial ordinances, reliable instructions, and good decrees and commandments. You revealed your holy Sabbath to them and gave them commandments, statutes, and a law through your servant Moses. You provided bread from heaven for their hunger. You brought them water from the rock for their thirst. You told them to go in and possess the land you had sworn to give them. But our ancestors acted arrogantly. They became stiff-necked and did not listen to your commands. They refused to listen, and you did not remember your words you performed among them. They became stiff-necked and appointed a leader to return to their slavery. But you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and rich in faithful love. You did not abandon them, even after they had cast an image of a calf for themselves and said, 'This is your God, who brought you out of Egypt.' And they had committed terrible blasphemies. You did not abandon them in the wilderness because of your great compassion." So, yeah. Anybody catch that?
There is a popular teaching going around that states after the sin of the golden calf is when the law was imposed upon Israel, I think is what's taught as a
that they were forced to obey the law. Yeah, and that the Levites were only created after the golden calf. But we're in the book of Jubilees, we have Levi given the promise of priesthood eternally. Malachi 2 reaffirms it. Jeremiah 33 reaffirms it. I mean, it's unfortunately there are some theories that run around that lack scriptural citation.
So in case you don't catch the verse that we're talking about, it says, "You are a God of forgiveness, merciful and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in love. Therefore you did not abandon them, even when they made a cast image of a calf for themselves and said, 'This is your God who brought you up from Egypt.'" So this was something we stumbled on when we were doing this study, and I mean, we already knew that it's a really errant teaching to, first of all, to teach that the Levitical priesthood is a curse and a burden and a punishment to begin with, but there's this very specific teaching that puts it right at that marker in time of the golden calf, where that's when the Levitical sacrificial system was imposed upon Israel as a punishment for their sin of the calf.
Even though, like 2-3 chapters earlier in Exodus 26-27, Aaron's already been anointed priest. So I don't know where to get the idea.
Leaving Egypt to go sacrifice. I mean, there's all kinds of problems with that teaching.
Even though in Exodus 19, there's already priests at the base of the mountain.
Yeah,
they have to,
there was an allotted land for priests in Egypt before they even left Egypt. Under Joseph, when he was, the Pharaoh.
Genesis 45, is it?
Yeah, the Pharaoh allotted land for the priests. So, I mean, I don't know if we call them Levitical priests at that point in time, but
it's from Jubilees chapter 31.
So
Levi
there were already
the
Levitical priests in Egypt before they were ever even needed to be brought out of Egypt. So we just thought that was a neat little gem when we were studying this.
Yeah, just the Father's word will always clarify. Yep. We just got to keep reading.
Yep.
So where we stop? Verse 19. You did not abandon them in the wilderness because of your great compassion. During the day, the pillar of cloud never turned away from them, guiding them on their journey. And during the night, the pillar of fire illuminated the way they should go. I always love this because it's basically they get a big nightlight. Really. Like, you get a big nightlight in the desert. That's great. It keeps off the bad animals. It keeps off, I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons it's a positive.
Do you think it attracted the mosquitoes?
Well, it's...
Or do you think it was, that kind of a light?
Well, I don't know if it put off heat. I mean, it gets colder in a desert environment at night.
True.
I don't know if it put off heat to kind of even out the temperatures. But all I know is that it definitely was a great little nightlight to go, to your midnight bathroom break, outside your tent.
I suppose it came in handy.
So, anyway.
20.
Verse 20, you sent your good spirit to instruct them. You did not withhold your manna from their mouths. You gave them their water for their thirst. You provided for them in the wilderness 40 years, and they lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. You gave them kingdoms and peoples, and assigned them to be a boundary. They took possession of the land of Sihon, king of Heshbon, and of the land of Og, king of Bashan. You multiplied their descendants like the stars of heaven and brought them to the land. You told their ancestors to go in and take possession of it. So their descendants went in and possessed the land. You subdued the Canaanites, who inhabited the land before them, and handed their kings and the surrounding peoples over to them, to do as they pleased with them. And so I just thought we'd stop right there. This is obviously reiterating what we read in Deuteronomy 1 through 3, verse 22. And I just thought it was a great little aside to throw in there, because Nehemiah is reminding everyone of their history. Yeah. Okay, so we always have, it's always, it's always being reminded.
Telling the story, and the story of the Exodus. We see Stephen doing it
in Acts 7. Yeah,
he goes through the whole, and that's also one thing that I really like about this chapter, and this whole time of them coming back from the captivity. When you see these prayers of repentance where they're confessing their sin, they're not just confessing their sin, they're going all the way back to the sins of their fathers, back when they came out of Egypt. Is something that something that's interesting, and I never quite thought about when I'm confessing my sins in prayer.
It's interesting as a point of note and reference that they were respectful of the mistakes of their ancestors, that they were taught about them.
Right.
They, of course, were not claiming that those sins were not already atoned for.
Yeah.
And that they somehow had to try to atone for their ancestors' sins. The law doesn't work like that.
It's not like the Mormons baptizing the dead or anything.
Right.
They're not going back and confessing the sins for their fathers. It's just...
Or even like the modern apostolic movement, where people are going in and confessing for other people's sins, which I don't know where they're getting that stuff. It's clearly they're not reading.
Not from the book.
So that's there's a lot to it that we just want to make sure we bounce everything off the word. That's the biggest thing that we want to do with these Torah portions. And let's look real quick at our extra biblical pairing with this Torah portion, because we've read about the land of promise that they were stepping into from Deuteronomy, and while they're stepping into this, they're going into these territories that was promised to Abraham in Genesis 15. And let's read. Many people will ask the question, well, wait a minute, that was Abraham received the covenant, and he was the only one to receive the covenant. He was the first one to receive the covenant. That's why it's always referenced to the Israelites, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it's never referenced as of your fathers Adam and Enoch and Noah and Shem, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But let's see what Abraham has to say about it, and it's in Jubilees chapter 8, chapter 10, I believe.
I don't think that says chapter 8.
I know, but I think I hit the wrong button. So it's like chapter 10, and
10 through 21.
Let me see. It is chapter 8, 10 through 21. That's right. It's here it is, verse 10. Okay, so this is in Jubilees chapter 8, verse 10, and then we're going to read through 21 as well. And it said, it came to pass in the beginning of the 33rd Jubilee that they divided the earth into 3 parts, for Shem and Ham and Japheth, according to the inheritance of each, in the first year, in the first week, when one of us, who had been sent, was with them. By the way, the one of us, the book of Jubilees is written from the narration of angels, that, like Hebrews chapter 2 and Galatians chapter 3 tell us, that angels mediated on Sinai. And that is chapter 1 of Jubilees, how it opens up in that fashion, that it's the angels giving the law that's kept in heaven, the law that's been around since creation, as they explained to Moses. This the same law for everybody, even for angels in heaven, right? This is the instructions for how you live as an existent being. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the instructions for behavior in righteousness, and it's eternal, and it's from start to finish, both in heaven and on the earth. And the angels are giving this law on Sinai to Moses, and while they're doing it, the book of Jubilees is them explaining it through the lens of how his fathers, all the way back to Noah, kept the law. So this is where, it's fascinating, because he's giving them backstory. The angels are giving Moses backstory, about this is why you're doing the laws, this is where this law even came from, this is where the new moon celebrations came from, because Noah instituted them in chapter 6 of Jubilees after his experiences throughout the year of the flood. And so, these are some very interesting conversations in the book of Jubilees. If you've never tried reading it, I, strongly encourage you to take a glance, and you'll be amazed on how it venerates not only the Torah, but the patriarchs, and gives us all this backstory about who they were and why they were considered so amazing and so faithful to God. And why, whenever the covenant's mentioned, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are always mentioned, because those guys were extremely faithful. I mean, they really put in their dues in faith and obedience. And so, all right, let's just read here.
So that's who the us are.
That's who the us are.
Long
The
story
angels
short.
are speaking. Sorry. Sorry. Jubilees is a great book. Check it out, guys. Verse 10. And it came to pass in the beginning of the 33rd Jubilee that they divided the earth into 3 parts, for Shem and Ham and Japheth, according to the inheritance of each. And in the first year, in the first week, when one of us who had been sent was with them, and he called his sons, and they drew nigh to him, and their children. This is Noah, called his sons to him. And he divided the earth into the lots, which his 3 sons were to take in possession. And they reached forth their hands, and took the writing out of the bosom of Noah, their father. You know what this reminds me of? It's kind of like he just put 3 pieces of paper in a hat, and they drew. They're like, he's holding the hat, and they're like, draw in, look away, and draw in. And
I mean, that's essentially what casting lots is, right?
That's what it feels like, anyway. All right, so, and there came forth on the writing as Shem's lot of the middle of the earth, which he should take as an inheritance for himself and for his sons, for the generations of eternity. For the generations of eternity. Okay. From the middle of the mountain range of Rapha, I don't know where that is. If anyone does, please put it in the comments. From the mouth of the water of the river Tina, I didn't know Tina had a river. And his portions go forth towards the west through the midst of their river, and it extends till it reaches the water of the abysses, out of which this river goes forth and pours its waters into the sea Miat. And this river flows into the great sea. And all that is towards the north is Japheth's, and all that it is towards the south belongs to Shem. And it extends till it reaches Carousel. This is the bosom of the tongue which looks towards the south. And his portion extends along the great sea, and it extends in a straight line till it reaches the west of the tongue which looks towards the south. For this sea is named the tongue of the sea of the Egyptian sea. Right? So many people would think this is actually the Red Sea they're referring to because of the land. Anyway, so it's verse 15, and it turns from here towards the south, towards the mouth of the great sea. It's either talking about the Indian Ocean or the Mediterranean Sea at that point. And it turns here from the south, towards the mouth was got to be the Indian Ocean, right? The Gulf, the Persian Gulf, basically. On the shores of the water, and extends toward the west of Afra, which I'm guessing is this abbreviated version for Africa, very possibly. And it extends till it reaches the waters of the river Gihon. Actually, the river Gihon runs through Ethiopia and Africa, so I'm guessing it's talking about the Horn of Africa. And toward the south of the waters of Gihon to the banks of this river, extends toward the east till it reaches the Garden of Eden. I'm just going to stop right there and let people ponder on that for a minute.
Okay.
Because, if you haven't read about what Jubilees claims about the Garden of Eden in chapter 4 and even through chapter 7 with Enoch, you guys got to check out that book. It's fascinating. This also helps you understand the gospel of the kingdom, how the Garden of Eden in Isaiah 49 is being mentioned as something that went through the flood and was storm-tossed and afflicted, but God promised that wouldn't happen to it again, because when he brings it down next time as the New Jerusalem expanded and enlarged and glorified is the gospel of the kingdom of God, it's never going to be destroyed again, right? Because everyone inside of it will never transgress the law again. So there's very interesting things here, and until it reaches the Garden of Eden to the south thereof, and from the east of the whole land of Eden. Now, I just want people to catch that. It referenced the Garden of Eden, but it also is talking about the whole land of Eden. All right, so there's the land of Eden in which the garden was placed in Genesis chapter 2. So there's a land, and then inside that land was the actual placement of the garden. So the entire land itself is not the Garden of Eden. So anyway, I'm just sharing that out. All right. And of the whole east, it turns to the east and proceeds till it reaches the east of the mountains of Rapha and descends to the bank of the mouth of the river Tina. This portion came forth by lot for Shem and for his sons, and it should possess it forever and to his generations forevermore. Now, I don't know if you guys are paying attention to the fact that many of these descriptions that it just gave us is carving out the area that was promised to Abraham. They're using different names because this is dated back slightly different time period, but the mountain regions here and the river Gihon down through Ethiopia and everything, this whole concept here from the tongue of the sea of the river Egypt, the Red Sea, over up into these, what I'm thinking is the mountains of Rapha is closer towards the land of Chaldea. So this whole concept here is basically carving out this idea of what was promised to Abraham, the same area, geographical areas. So this portion came forth by lot for Shem and his sons, that they should possess it forever unto his generations forevermore. And verse 18 says, and Noah rejoiced that this portion came forth for Shem and his sons. And he remembered all that he had spoken with his mouth in prophecy, for he said, blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and may the Lord dwell in the dwelling of Shem. So the New Jerusalem, which is the paradise of God, where Enoch 105, Revelation 22, the Almighty and the Son are now the conduit of the New Jerusalem, dwells on the land and is brought down through the firmament. The kingdom has come, right? It is the dwelling place of God. And this is the same area that Noah's rejoicing. Yes, Shem gets this area.
And you know what's interesting is from extra biblical sources, we know that the Melchizedek priest mentioned that Abraham went and tithed to was Shem. So it's just very interesting that when that land returns, our high priest under the order of Melchizedek will be returning with it. So it's the land of Shem in kind of all these, I don't know, deeper ways, I guess you would say, metaphorical ways. I'm not sure, maybe a parallel to Yeshua being our high priest now, but I find that interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. All right, we got 3 more verses and we're done with the extra biblical. Verse 19, he says, and he knew that the Garden of Eden, because Noah rejoiced, right? Because if you remember the prophecy about Shem, that his and his descendants should inherit this land forevermore, that God would dwell in this same area. And verse 19 says, and he knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies. The dwelling of the Lord, and Mount Sinai, the center of the desert, and Mount Zion, the center of the navel of the earth. And that these 3 were created as holy places facing each other. This is interesting, guys. And he placed the God of gods who had put, and he blessed the God of gods who had put the word of the Lord into his mouth, and the Lord forevermore. Last verse, verse 21. And he knew that a blessed portion and a blessing had come to Shem and his sons unto generations forever. The whole land of Eden, and the whole land of the Red Sea, and the whole land of the east of India, and on the Red Sea, and the mountains thereof, and all the land of Bashan, all the land of Lebanon, the islands of Kaftar. What are we talking about? The Kaftarim, right? Into the Mediterranean Sea. And all the mountains of Sanir and Amana, all the mountains of Asher in the north, the land of Elam, Asher and Babel, Susan and Medea, all the mountains of Ararat, and all the region beyond the sea, which is beyond the mountains of Asher towards the north, a blessed and spacious land, and all that is in it is very good. So guys, I just want to encourage you guys, because the New Jerusalem in its dimensions given in Revelation 21, which is the kingdom of God, is bigger than the modern day political state of Israel.
Oh yeah.
And it encompasses these descriptions I just read to you from Jubilees chapter 8, verse 10 through 21. It's the same promise given from even, Noah is talking about this with Shem. Yep. I mean, they're getting off the boat, right? And they're trying to figure out who's going to go which way, and who's going to inherit all this uninherited land that's just been cleaned and washed of all the Nephilim filth and all the chaos that caused over the earth, and they get a fresh start. And they reach into the hat, and I don't think it's by accident, but they pull out a portion for Shem, and it's the territory of the New Jerusalem. So, is it any wonder that Eber comes from Shem? Is it any wonder that Terah comes from Eber? Is it any wonder that Abraham comes from Terah?
Yeah.
Isaac to Jacob to Abraham, right? To Moses, to all the descendants of Israel at Sinai who enter into faith and obedience in the covenant, and to all of us who believe and are grafted in, right? It's not any wonder that we all get the same promise of the same covenant. Okay? It excites me. It excites me a lot. I get excited.
And on that note, I think it would be good to go ahead and pull up what we decided to pair from the Brit, because
That's
it's
right.
also related,
That's true.
as I'm sure you would guess, to the kingdom and to us entering that land. So we chose from the Brit for this portion, we chose Matthew 13.
Yeah, Matthew 13.
So let me go there and I'll read it.
Sure.
Okay, and we did, okay, so Matthew 13 verses 36 through 43?
43, yeah.
All right. Then he sent the crowds away and went into the house. His disciples came to him saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." I'm sure in lots of Bibles that probably says tares.
Yeah.
Mine says weeds. Okay, verse 37. He answered, "The one sowing the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. And the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, just as the weeds are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who practice lawlessness. They will throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear." So what I saw in this, obviously relating to the Torah portion, is Yeshua going into that land before we enter it, before we actually inherit the promised land. Yeshua and all his angels are going to go in there, just like the children of Israel were supposed to go in to the promised land and root out all that bad, blood, whatever's going on there, all the sin, all those, Nephilim tribes. Just like they were supposed to go in and do all that, we're going to have Yeshua and his angels come, and they're not going to mess up this time. Yeah. All of that wickedness and evil in that land is going to be completely destroyed and rooted out before we enter that land in the New Jerusalem. And it all has to be, it's really defiled. Yeah. It's been defiled for thousands of years. So
and this is the moment where it's burned with fire.
Yeah, exactly.
And the whole area of it's burned with fire.
Right.
Modern day state of political Israel is not going to be there anymore, guys.
Nope.
It's all getting burned with fire. The entire area that we just read about, the portion promised. Massive earthquake, Revelation 16:8. All the cities of the world are crumbling. All the valleys are made low. The valleys are raised up. The hills are made low. This massive earthquake shaking all the mountains into its valleys. The entire area of the land promised to Shem and Abraham and all of us in covenant is leveled out.
Yep.
So that it's a foundation for a massive city,
yeah.
Right? That's a continent-sized city with its own land and streams and rivers and mountains. It's coming down through the firmament. It's called the paradise of God. It's called Zion in the Old Testament. It's called the New Jerusalem in the New Testament.
It's called His Holy Mountain.
It's called His Holy Mountain.
It's a fun word study to do of all the different
Here's something I want to throw in.
it.
We read to verse 46, but if you look at verse 49 of the same chapter, it talks about again, the kingdom of heaven is like a large net thrown into the sea, collected every kind of fish, and when it was full, they dragged it ashore, set down, and gathered the good fish into containers, but threw out the worthless ones.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be at the end of the age, the angels will go out and separate the evil people from the righteous. I looked up this word in the Greek one time, and I did this for one of my other Kingdom in Context videos, and it was the Last Trumpet video in my first Resurrection series. And in the Greek, that word separate, the angels will separate the wicked from the righteous. That word separate, and the English vernacular, we think, oh, they're going to separate it, so like they're going to separate the wicked from the righteous. The word actually means to cordon off, to quarantine. It's kind of a bad generic translation, but it means to literally cordon off. So they're pushing everything out, and this is why it says in other prophets, it says anything within that area that won't leave is burned with fire.
Yeah.
Right? But they're pushing out everyone out of this area because the city's about to set down. The angels are literally cordoning off 1,500 miles squared as the New Jerusalem is measured, so they can come and sit it down. They have to move everything out of the way.
Which is also something to note, that a lot of people have this concept of the end times and when Jesus returns, that all the wicked in the whole entire world are going to be destroyed at that point in time. It's just this area where they're all going to be rooted out. So there are going to be survivors of the day of the Lord that are going to be living outside of the New Jerusalem. They're going to have to come to that city because the whole world is going to be real messed up from this. I mean, the firmament's going to crack open, and that's going to, I can't even imagine.
Stars fall to the ground.
Stars fall to the ground. If there's water up there, I don't know if it falls down. I don't know. So the world is going to be really jacked up from this event. But there are going to be people who survive it. It's in this area of land where there aren't going to be anyone, no one's going to be surviving Yeshua coming back in that specific area. But so when you hear Sean and I talk on Facebook about survivors of the day of the Lord coming to the New Jerusalem, this is what we're talking about. Like he said, it's an area that's cordoned off. So people are left alive outside of that area.
But they're going to want to come to the city.
Exactly.
Because what does Revelation 22 tell us?
Right.
Spirit and the bride say, come.
Yeah.
We've got the trees that grow along the river of life, Ezekiel 47, Revelation 22, verse 2, that have healing in the trees for the people who come up. You get the free water from the river of life, and you get free food from the inside the city. So
buy food without money.
Buy food, Isaiah 55, come, buy food and water without money. You're going to get, I mean, like I've tongue-in-cheek said before, the New Jerusalem literally helps the survivors survive.
Right.
That's how we know it doesn't come down at the end of the 1,000 years. It's down here at the return of the Messiah. It comes after him. And so that's where it has to, because that's where it reigns from, for one, Isaiah 2 through 5. But also that's where the whole world gravitates to and camps outside and around it, because that helps them survive. And it's where they learn Torah from everybody.
There is no other reason for us to have the trees of life that heal people in a city where we live, where we've been resurrected and we have incorruptible bodies that we're not going to need to be healed from anything.
That's right.
So the only reason we would have trees of life that are going to heal people is if there are mortal people living outside of the New Jerusalem who need to come and be healed. Because people are, I mean, they're going to go through a lot on the day of the Lord. It's not going to, people who say they're praying for Jesus to return and they're so excited for him to come back really haven't studied the day of the Lord, because even the Bible tells us, don't you dread that day, because it's going to be a really horrific, it's going to be a pretty horrific event, especially for the people who don't believe. So, people are going to, there's going to be a lot of pain and suffering that happens as a result of that, but they're going to come to the city and be healed. And really, we're going to be exhibiting the epitome of love thy neighbor when we're living in the New Jerusalem, and these people who mocked and scorned him and hated him are going to be coming to us to not only be fed and healed, but to also to learn his wonderful ways. We're going to be teaching them his Torah. Some of us are going to be priests, so who knows what kind of duties we'll be performing for those people on, through the intercessory role of priests. So, there's definitely a lot of misconceptions about that millennial reign, but when you start looking at the details of what's going on in that city during that reign, you can only conclude that it has to be down, that the New Jerusalem has to be down on the ground during that millennial reign because of the things that we are doing for the people who survive the day of the Lord.
That's right, yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
It's amazing.
To me, it is what James chapter 1 talks about when he says this is pure and undefiled religion, that you care after the widows and orphans, because that's going to be the bulk of the survivors of the day of the Lord, because all the men came to fight at Armageddon. So the bulk of the people will be cared for, who will be widows and orphans. This is kingdom talk James is talking about, a pure and undefiled religion. So it's anyway, it just excites me. We could go on for 4 hours.
Yeah, we could.
But
we should probably wrap it up.
This has been an interesting experiment in our first kingdom portion, and
our first couple show.
It's our first couples show. Yes. So I am privileged and proud to be a co-host with you on this show, and I thank you all for joining us. It's been great. Is there anything you want to say in closing?
No, just thank you. Thank you for watching, and I just want to pray to the Father that everything that we've said would be edifying to people, and just pray that you guys would go and study these things out and be inspired by this to go look for the kingdom in the Torah. I'm not saying we shouldn't look for Yeshua, our Messiah, in the Torah.
He's the king of the kingdom.
He is the king of the kingdom.
Yeah.
But we have been taught for far too long to focus on looking for just him in the feasts, in the Sabbath, in everything that we do. And it's great, but the fullness is in the kingdom and the gospel of the kingdom.
Well, that's because that's what Jesus himself preached.
And that's the Torah is going to be our constitution. It's going to be the law of the land. So
Absolutely.
the whole thing is about the kingdom, and that's what Yeshua came to preach to us, is the gospel of the kingdom. So I just want to encourage everyone that when you start to understand these core concepts of, priesthood, resurrection, day of the Lord, kingdom, the whole book just really falls into place, and all the confusion that we've all experienced for generations when trying to understand the gospel, it all just naturally falls away when you understand these core concepts, and it all is rooted in the kingdom. So.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for joining us, guys. Like I said, please leave your comments below. We'll try to get to them as fast as we can. And Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
All right, see you next time.
Thanks for watching, guys. This has been so much fun to present these scriptures and go over this type of virtual Bible study with you. If what we did was a blessing to you, please consider clicking on these other videos. We have other concepts on the channel that you might find very edifying as well. Be sure to like, share, and of course hit the subscribe and the bell button. And we hope to see you back next week.